This week, we're going to do a live Q&A for Zone 2. So I asked what are the most common Zone 2 questions from my fitness community, and I've got a pretty good list here. And the first question is my kind of questions. How much Zone 2 is too much Zone 2? And to be honest, I'm not sure anyone's found that there is an upper limit yet. So if we look at pro cyclists typically train 30 plus hours per week, with the vast majority of it being upper Zone 1, Zone 2. We've got pro Ironman triathletes training about the same volume. We've got Olympic swimmers and rowers in the same sort of volume, cross-country skiers. I'm not sure that for a middle-aged guy or girl with a full-time job and kids and all these other responsibilities that there is a physical upper limit. The upper limit is simply going to be one based on your current fitness levels and what your recovery ability is. But I don't believe there is a physiological limit that we've found yet. The limit is only going to be set by what your recovery is. One of the most frequent questions is how long does it have to be? So when we look at the aerobic system, it's powered by this thing called the Krebs cycle. And the Krebs cycle is just how we make energy in the body, but it's quite a slow process because fat is quite a slow burning fuel. It takes about 20 minutes for the Krebs cycle to get up to speed. So if we're looking at aerobic adaptation driven by this Zone 2 training, what we really need is that we have to go for at least 20 minutes. And then when we look and extrapolate this out, you can actually see significant increases in fat use at about the 90-minute mark, and you can actually see it again at about the 4-hour mark. So from 20 minutes as a start to about 45 minutes is the first significant uptick, and then about 90 minutes is the next really big uptick in fat utilization, and then again at about the 4-hour mark. Now, fat utilization doesn't mean you're going to gain the most fitness from there. It means you're in a zone where you're actually utilizing fatty acids the best for fuel. So fat loss and Zone 2 fitness training aren't necessarily the same thing, but it gives you an idea of where the sweet spots are for training. So somewhere around 45 minutes to about 90 minutes. And then again, if you're into an ultra endurance event, 4 hours plus is definitely a really important event for massive endurance training. When it comes to structuring how much time between sessions, again, the answer comes down to your recovery ability. So if I have a beginner, for instance, maybe they actually need 2 days between 30-minute Zone 2 runs because their body's still adapting to the impact forces of running. But someone who's more experienced, maybe they cycle a lot, they could do a 2-hour Zone 2 ride today, they could back it up with a 1-hour Zone 2 ride tomorrow, and that wouldn't be a problem for them. When we get asked, as another question, how many in a day? Again, I've trained with pro Ironman guys who fit 3 sessions in a day. I've seen pro cyclists train twice a day. So we know you can hit at least 2 sessions a day. Generally, you want to separate them as much as possible. So don't train at like 6 a.m. and 9 a.m. You'd want to train at 6 or 7 a.m. and probably again at about 5 or 6 p.m. Separate each session by as much as possible, by nearly 12 hours if you can, so you've got the maximum possible recovery time. I found when I did Ironman, one of my personal problems was that because I was running gym sessions at 6 o'clock in the morning, I couldn't attend any of the group squad training that I had access to. I would have to train at 9 or 10 a.m. when things got quiet for me. And then I had to fit my second training session in around 2 p.m. so I could be ready again for normal gym busy hours around 5 or 6 p.m. So my sessions were very closely stacked together, and that was a big problem with recovery for me. As I've moved out of working in the gym and I can spread my training sessions out, I find it much easier to recover from 2 sessions a day with that bigger gap between training sessions than I used to when I have to keep them really closely together. So if you're planning 2 sessions a day, definitely spread them out as much as possible. While we're talking 2 sessions a day, another common question is, can I do a hard session and an easy session in the same day? The answer is yes, but it's dependent on your recoverability, your baseline. I know for me, under normal circumstances, I'm sick at the moment, but under normal circumstances, I could definitely do a hard session early in the day and an easy aerobic Zone 2 session later in the day, no problem. I could do weights in the morning and an easy aerobic session. I could do just about any combination plus an easy aerobic session for the day, and it would be absolutely fine. But again, it comes down to your recovery ability. If you're new to things, I always suggest get the most you can from the smallest number of sessions available. So if you're making progress on 3 single sessions a week, continue doing 3 single sessions a week until you no longer make progress. At the point where you're now training 4 or 5 times a week and you can't make any more progress from 4 or 5 sessions, Now we need to start adding in multiple sessions per day. But that could be 2 or 3 years away before you get to the point where you've extracted everything you can from a smaller amount of training. So in general, before you start adding in more training, make sure you've gotten all the benefit you can from what you're currently doing. Probably one of the things that confuses people the most is what exactly is Zone 2 in the first place. Maybe I should have covered this first, but Zone 2 is from what I would think of as a standard model of trying to break down heart rates into various zones that give an idea about the level of intensity that we're going through. So Zone 1 would be really restful, like going for a walk. So Zone 1 is absolutely all day activity. At the other end, depending on who you talk to, it's in the zone, there's multiple Zone 5s or Zone 6, and that's an absolute all-out effort for just a few seconds, because something that is our absolute maximal effort, we can't sustain for very long. So this is the point where if you're doing an actual VO2 max test, you achieve your absolute maximum heart rate and then have to stop almost immediately because you can't carry that on. And then we've got this range in between. Now, Zone 2 is the point where you are working aerobically and you're working as hard as you can aerobically before the demand for carbohydrates steps up significantly. So at this point, at the top of your Zone 2, you're burning 50-50 for carbohydrate and fat. And as you start to work harder, not only do you need to start burning more and more carbohydrate, you're producing more and more lactic acid, and you're now producing it at a rate that prevents you from clearing it so that exercise can continue indefinitely. So Zone 2 is the top of what should be your all-day ability, provided you've got the fueling to deal with it. Like I just said, if Zone 2 is the top of your all-day ability, we need to look at some of activities like walking, for instance, that people commonly say are cardiovascular activities. Now, if you've watched our cardio video, you know that the number one criteria for a cardiovascular exercise is that it increases stroke volume, right? If stroke volume doesn't increase, then you can't count it as a cardiovascular activity. And you will not see stroke volume increase from walking unless you're severely deconditioned. So if you've been bedridden in hospital for 6 months and you've had severe bronchial infections, maybe severe, like extreme surgery, you may actually see a fitness improvement from walking. But for most people, under most circumstances, walking isn't actually going to be hard enough to create that stroke volume change that really dictates whether it's a cardiovascular activity or not. The only caveat to that would be if you could walk up a hill continuously. If you can maintain a normal walking pace up a continuous hill for, again, more than 20 minutes and extend it out as far as 90 minutes or 4 hours, then walking might count as a Zone 2 activity. But most of us aren't going to be able to walk up a non-stop hill for hours at a time simply because of geography. That's just not how most places where we live seem to be. You can replicate that on a treadmill in a gym, obviously, and then yes, you can walk at Zone 2, but under normal circumstances, just walking around the streets near your house, that's not a Zone 2 activity. So now we've started talking about what kinds of activities really should be used for Zone 2 work. We can clearly see that there's kind of like, there's an upper class and a lower class when it comes to activities. In the upper class, and this is research going all the way back to about the 1960s, shows that running, riding, rowing, and cross-country skiing are the big four for increasing cardiovascular fitness. And that means those should be the first 4 choices for us to choose for a Zone 2 activity. We can add in VersaClimber as well, based on some studies done on VersaClimbers, but very difficult to find good studies done on VersaClimbers. But those 5 in general will be our top few for cardiovascular improvement, and therefore choices for Zone 2 training. In the next tier down, we have things like skipping and boxing, where you can see a VO2 improvement under some conditions, but you need to be working very hard. They're actually gender specific. Females tend to do better with skipping and boxing as a method of VO2 improvement than men do. And so when we're looking for a Zone 2 activity, skipping and boxing aren't great choices. In that final tier, we've got loaded activity like circuit training, kettlebells, any of that kind of stuff that people typically use these days as cardio. Those things are not really great methods of increasing cardiovascular fitness, therefore they're not really good choices for a Zone 2 workout. The best choice for a Zone 2 workout is run, ride, row, cross-country ski, or VersaClimber. One of the biggest questions I get asked is whether or not just training in Zone 2 will increase your VO2 max. Many people will tell you you need to do all kinds of intense interval training to increase VO2 max. And in one of my previous videos, I actually talked about the levels of response that people see from aerobic activity and how at certain levels, some people can be low responders to aerobic work, other people will be high responders. But when we're looking at our zone 2 work and wondering whether or not we'll see a VO2 improvement, the people who are high responders to aerobic activity will see an aerobic improvement, a VO2 max improvement, just from doing zone 2 work. I'm actually one of those people. I can do nothing but zone 2 work. I can do interval work that technically is still zone 2 work and see a VO2 max improvement. I have friends who are less responsive than me to aerobic activity, who actually need much more intensity. Those people in general, though, are actually at a higher level of fitness than me. And so what we see with higher levels of fitness is you have to actually push yourself more to get to another higher level. It's more difficult to make improvement when you're at a higher level. So at the level I'm at, I can actually see improvements just from zone 2 work. All of my customers have seen improvements in VO2 max just from zone 2 work. But again, as we get fitter, head towards events, have specific goals in mind, we actually increase the level of intensity that they use and the amount of specific VO2 max that they do for that. Final question is always the same when it comes to endurance work. People are worried that it's going to be catabolic for the amount of muscle tissue that they have. Look, there is no evidence to show that running or riding or any other zone 2 work decreases muscle tissue. Okay, there's no evidence to show that muscle atrophy occurs from running or riding. What does happen is people are less likely to go to the gym and lift heavy weights because their legs are tired. So if you let yourself get used to the process gradually, you'll maintain your strength while doing more zone 2 work and increasing your aerobic endurance, but you will never lose muscle if you allow that to happen. If you suddenly go from no endurance work to 6 to 10 hours a week, you are absolutely going to lose some muscle because you won't have the time or energy to go to the gym. The second one is that people don't eat adequate amount of food. The amount of calories you burn going for a run for an hour versus a gym session are anywhere from 2 to 4 times greater. So it's very easy if you add in a lot of endurance work all of a sudden to need 2 to 4 times the amount of food in a given day. And you can see if you're eating whole ingredient, single ingredient foods, how much food volume that might be. I can tell you now, if you're eating more than 3,000 calories a day of single ingredient food, that is an awful lot of food to be trying to eat for the day. And when you consider you're effectively starving yourself in these conditions, you will actually lose some muscle tissue as your body fights to keep you going. So you can lose muscle. It's not a direct result of the endurance training. It's a byproduct of the fatigue and the appetite that has to go with the endurance training, but there's no evidence at all to show that running or riding leads to loss of muscle tissue. Make sure to hit like and subscribe if you liked the video. Make sure to go to the website, www.peakperformance40.com, and join the community of guys just like you looking for the best health and fitness advice.